Welcome back to the Connected podcast. I'm thrilled to bring you an extraordinary collection in which some incredible students take the driver's seat and host dynamic conversations with professionals from across the higher education sector, discussing the vital topic of student belonging. In our next episode, Callum talks to Ashley Storer-Smith, a student success manager at Anglia Ruskin University and also a member of the RAISE committee. Ashley describes their role as everything outside of the classroom, supporting students from welcome week to graduation and everything in between. Ashley is also an active researcher, specifically focusing on how underrepresented students feel, or sometimes don't feel, a sense of belonging within their institution.
So I'd like to start off by just asking our guests how they define belonging. And I'm just really interested to get your thoughts on how your experiences, your work has shaped your understanding and your definition of belonging, and what your view of how students develop belonging is.
Yeah, so I a lot of my research and a lot of the kind of my experiences around belonging is very unique because of kind of how I experienced higher education. So I was the first in my family ever go to university. I was a commuter student. I came out as trans non-binary whilst being a student, and I was the last of people paying £3,000 a year. So a lot of the kind of reflections I had was all my peers in the years below me were paying triple the amount of fees. And that really, all that kind of stuff combined really kind of framed this idea of what it mean to truly belong in higher education, because there is so much pressures, no matter who you are as a student, but even more so for underrepresented students, around their time at university due to commercialisation of higher education and all that kind of stuff, which really kind of pushed me to look at this idea of when do students not feel belonging, or how do students sometimes actively feel like they're against their institution. Hence why I've done a lot of research around kind of student activism and student change making within higher education, where students are so intent on their feeling that they don't feel like they belong, that they are taking radical steps to create their own belonging and create their own space within the university. So that's kind of why my kind of framing of belonging is very much usually kind of what does belonging not look like rather than what does it look like, due to kind of how I work.
Yeah, great. And I think that's a great place to start, isn't it? Because I was just reflecting on your experience and thinking about my own. And I was first in family to go to university. I was a commuter student, and I definitely think that those experiences have shaped my understanding of belonging. But as you say, have maybe made me understand why I don't belong, as opposed to thinking about what helps me to belong. And we typically sometimes think about belonging in terms of kind of belonging to academic spaces, into your kind of school community, or belonging to a group or a society or a social group. So I'm interested to hear your thoughts about why individual students might not belong, and what the factors are that are contributing to that initially. So why is it that maybe we're looking at belonging perhaps sometimes at that kind of surface level, and what are we forgetting to think about? What might the barriers be to belonging?
Yeah, I think from my experience, especially focusing on kind of from my practical work, very much looking at community students, then through a lot of my research, looking at trans and non-binary students, the kind of commonality of when they don't feel belong is very much around their first experiences within university, and that the difficulty that they have to be involved in the basic traditional feelings of university life. So within commuter students, that could be that fear of how much it costs to actually attend, or their classes, or that they need to worry about the trains home to be able to get involved in social activity, or that they already have their own friendship groups because they are a commuting student and don't feel university in a much more utilitarian space. And then if we look at the research I've done around trans non-binary students, it is very much seeing and when I've done that research directly with those students, either just students or students who have taken up a leadership role in some form, it always goes back to that kind of initial experience of university. They're being dead named on acceptance letters, or having to fight to have the right name on their degree, or having to walk to a different building to just be able to find a gender neutral toilet, or all those kind of very, very simple things that I think when we look at a lot of people who do research around underrepresented student belonging, there is that real kind of initial focus on those kind of early touch points to make sure they have a parity of experience. But I think with trans non-binary students particularly, what I've seen as well is that because there is that very negative social narrative around us, the trans non-binary people, that already kind of sets people on that kind of back foot, and that kind of fear of speaking to others, or like that kind of trepidation when having new interactions, partnered with that a lot of trans non-binary students now already have communities around them digitally, that they don't feel like they need to find a community within the university, is really fascinating. And so when I came out, there wasn't really many digital or physical communities for trans non-binary students. I very much had to go into the activism space and NUS and things like that to find those spaces, where actually a lot of those spaces are created when those students are 16, 17, 18, if you're looking at the kind of the traditional student.
Yeah, and there's so much to unpick there, isn't there? And one of the things that really struck me about what you were saying is this kind of belonging is not something that is done to somebody and then it finishes. Belonging is something that is ever evolving, and it might be that you feel in certain aspects of your university experience that you do belong. There might be times where you're made to feel safe and you develop those connections, and then, like you were saying, it might be right at the end of your degree at graduation and seeing your name not represented correctly on a certificate, and so I think what you've suggested is really important, which is that we can't think of belonging as just a induction package that happens at the beginning of a first year student's experience. It's the life cycle of that student, and how we help them to find their sense of value, themselves, their identity, within the community of the university, but also that allows them to feel like they can express their own identity and share their own sense of worth and value with the community they're coming into. So I think that's so interesting and so important. And I just wonder then, how are we, or how are universities supporting students from minorities, students from underrepresented backgrounds, to find these opportunities to belong? Is it happening, or is it that it's happening organically between those communities and we're not learning how to do that in our wider university communities?
Yeah, I think it is happening naturally outside of the traditional university communities. Like previous to my kind of current role within the university, I've spent 10 years in the students' union space, and one of the big conversations always happened within kind of conferences within students' unions was this discussion of why we had a massive call to have a trans non-binary student officer or a community student officer, but then no one wants to run for it, or we can't get people involved and to take up those traditional kind of representative or community creation roles. And initially it was just around, it's because they're voluntary and there's a time, there is that kind of decision on taking a voluntary or paid role. But actually what I found digging deeper is this, especially with those students from those communities that have and still kind of actively fighting for change within their institutions. And I think trans non-binary students is the one that, from not just my personal experience, but through kind of what's happening socially, is a real interesting group to see. Is that yes, they are wanting to have those communities. They'll create them outside of their institutions, and would prefer it to not be associated to their institution or students' union, because they feel that they want that independence, they want that space to be developed in their own way, but also that being involved in creating change in a traditional students as partners or students as representatives way means that they feel like they're going to be tokenized, or real change won't happen because their predecessors have told them that on the way out. So and I think that's a real thing, is where I've worked with other institutions or even done some consultancy work with groups. One of the big things I say is, if you are going to look at working with those communities that are already formed, you need to do it on their terms, not your terms. And really be respectful of the spaces they've developed, because they've developed them in those ways not because they couldn't have developed them or within the strict structures and systems that you've created. In some cases it is because they couldn't, but a lot of it's because they don't want to, and they want to have that kind of that independence and that legitimacy of independence, rather than being associated by a larger, as I said, usually the term that those students use would be corporate identity, which is the university or even the students' union. So I think from my perspective, and from the conversations that I've had, there is this kind of want to create change, but it being done on their own terms. So their liberation, their work that they're doing isn't co-opted by the university for charter marks or for glory, rather than actual real change around belonging.
Yeah. So how do you think we can do that? How do you think, or what actions do you think that universities need to take in order to be able to do that with communities? Because what you're talking about there, I agree, is about going to those communities, going to those students, and seeing and understanding as much as you can about their experiences and how they want to belong. But there's also you've got to get to a stage where that community feels that they can trust, as you were saying, that kind of corporate organization, with their stories, with their experiences, with sharing and being open about what they need. So how do we as universities move to a space where we can do that? What do we need to do?
I think for me, there is this, first and foremost, I talk about this term called liberation labour. So if you are utilising the emotional or physical labour of underrepresented students, make sure they are compensated for that effectively. I think also not relying on those students and those groups to educate you. There is a lot of, like I said, we have the internet, we have lots of great TED Talks, podcasts like this, resources, including some that I've worked with on Student Minds around how trans non-binary students are feeling and the initial stuff they want to see. And those students don't want to rehash those because it seems so obvious. So I think utilising your research and not relying on those students to be your educators initially. Yes, because if you go into those spaces already having a base knowledge, they are going to be much more open to talk about their personal and their specific experiences. I think also understanding when it comes to supporting and working with those communities to create change, that you are supporting, that you're doing it in a way that is on those communities' terms. So not dragging them to every single committee if they don't need to be there, not having them repeat their own personal difficult stories to every committee that they go to, or those kind of things, because that is incredibly exhausting for those students, and even feeling like even doing it the first time is incredibly vulnerable. And I think kind of finally, when it comes to engaging with those communities, making sure there isn't a unintended quid pro quo. It's very easy to tie working with you on funding or working with you on space as kind of an agreement, but it feels very much like that kind of quid pro quo, that kind of aspect of, oh, well, we're selling our soul a little bit. And I think specifically with, as I say, these trans non-binary student communities within universities are usually in Gen Z, and have a very different and negative view of any kind of corporation or corporate identity than the previous generations that we've worked with. So really understanding that and making sure that you're not, and again, a lot of time it is unintentionally tying working with you with some kind of reward for that group. So yeah, I think that those are the real kind of key 3 aspects that I've seen have worked. So understanding and compensating that liberation labour, not having to force students to reiterate their own personal troubles and stories within a ton of committees, and then making sure that you're not kind of making your support with them conditional on certain aspects.
Yeah, it makes me think about, the kind of Maslowian hierarchy, and about that kind of foundational physiological safety, isn't it? And it's about, I suppose, showing up and providing and acting in a way which creates those safe spaces and that level of trust through some connection, but to ultimately allow those conversations around belonging to occur. We could talk for ages on this, but I'm wondering, looking ahead to the future, what do you hope the research and the practice sectors in HE that are looking at belonging, what do you hope their future direction will be around these issues? Where do you think it will go? What do you hope it will achieve?
Yeah, I think for myself, I think it's all about giving flexibility and allowing and supporting organic creation, and only really kind of stepping in or changing or kind of forcing that direction where it could be harmful. So we see specifically in trans non-binary student communities where due to the nature of the society and the news stories that come in daily, it's very easy for those support spaces to become very can spiral and become very kind of difficult and negative for mental health. And that's a place where you should step in and create those things, right? But I think that's the big thing, is understanding how we can support these communities to grow organically, how to communicate and support them in a way that feels authentic, and not being scared that it's not being done in a formalized way. I think, especially when I've been speaking to SU colleagues and my own personal SU experience, there's always a want or need to force it into the structures that have been created by the union, even if those structures were co-created by students, but being forced into those structures because they need that for KPIs to be able to get more money, or for be able to do certain things that benefits the institution or the union. So I think it is allowing and supporting things to grow naturally, and be okay with that, and be supportive of that, and understand why that is how students are acting now. They don't need, like, the kind of final point that I want to say is that, yes, 20, 30 years ago, students needed a students' union or a poster board or staff to create their communities, because we didn't have internet. We didn't have the ability for students to find their own communities. We needed that structure at that time. We don't need that anymore. Students can create their own communities. It's about supporting them in that, and making sure that they're done in a way that is healthy and actually supportive, but allowing them to grow naturally, because there isn't that need for us to create that rigidity, because we don't need to have a physical book of all the societies that exist, or have those kind of formalized spaces. And yeah, in some spaces we will have those formalized, but actually being organic in its creation and growth is going to create something more authentic and more sustainable in the long term.
Brilliant. Ashley, it's been so lovely to talk to you this afternoon. Thank you so much for joining us. And I do hope that people will be inspired and energized, I think, about what you're saying, and will want to connect with you further on these conversations. So thank you for joining us this afternoon. And it's been really, really lovely to talk to you.
No, thank you so much.
Thank you for listening to the Connected podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, please check out the rest of our extraordinary Voices of Belonging collection and stay connected.